This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to aja.com for all your production and post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Merkel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals that deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com. Of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional, discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Zach Galler, whose work includes The Grudge, The Girlfriend Experience, and more recently, Lessons in Chemistry for Apple TV+. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
When you get like scripts for a show, how do you sit down? Like, how do you sit down and break them down to figure out the look and everything for the show?
When I first get scripts for a show, I'll often try and talk to whoever's sending them to me first. Sort of, if it's the director or producers or a showrunner, I'll try and talk to them about just to get a sense of what they're after, to sort of get the ball rolling down the hill and of aesthetically where the show should land. I don't want to go so far off into left field and spend a lot of time making lookbooks and really putting deep thought into how something looks just to have them tell me that they see it completely differently. So I think first of all, trying to figure out who I'm going to be collaborating with. And then once I figure out who I'm going to be collaborating with, I will start to pull a lot of reference images and from a lot of different websites or photography websites, things like that, and start to put together lookbooks and sort of use those to communicate throughout the process of prep where everybody thinks we should be. And when I have a strong with TV, it's more we want to make sure we're threading the needle, and then in movies it's really collaborating with the director early on to figure out this is what's right for the story. This is the thing that we should be pushing and going for.
I've been a camera person for 30 years and I fell in love with cinema. I heard there was free film school in France and I wanted to get into the French film school. I really didn't know anything at the time, but I knew at least how to take pictures. So I said, I'll try for the image department. And then when I miraculously got into the French film school, I fell in love with working with the camera. You're following what's going to be in the movie. So that immediacy that the camera allows is what I loved from the beginning. I'm Kirsten Johnson, and this is my course about documentary cinematography.
In something like this, it's set in the 50s for Lessons in Chemistry. And I'm wondering, how did you work with that team to figure out the look for this project?
So I think one of the original sort of mandates for the show is how can we do this differently, and how can we sort of freshen up the period and not fall into some of the sort of like tried and true things, and try to always be challenging ourselves with the story. I worked a lot with the production designer Kat Smith and with Mary Gordon Crozier, the wardrobe designer, to just try and create a whole world. And they came with these amazing ideas, and we would talk about how to sort of further push them further, and how we could sort of subvert the expected a little bit. And not that we did something so off the wall, but more just how can we create a world that it's not nostalgic. We're not sort of like idealizing anything that's going on, but we try and make it as real and as subjective for these characters as possible for everybody. And Miran and Kat both did a ton of storytelling with their, and by that notion, the hair and makeup departments as well. Teresa Hill, who did all the hair and a crazy number of wigs. Everybody, it was great because everybody was sort of progressing the story along. one thing we knew from the beginning was that this would be a 1-season show because of how the book finishes up and everything like that. So I think everybody was able to sort of gauge a point A to point B also, and sort of say, this is the story. We know it doesn't have to go on for a ton of seasons. We can get this whole sort of progression of color or progression of how the spaces feel all in one season and know where you're going to start and finish. And so we all work together on that kind of stuff. And then I think, yeah, we all work together on figuring that out.
So what were some of those, I guess, tropes or things that you wanted to subvert or go away from?
I think there are, I think in period pieces, sometimes we're so used to seeing our contemporary world around us that once we get on a set and it's this beautiful 50s, 60s, 70s, or Middle Ages, whatever it is, we are not to make statements for everybody, but we're sort of like the novelty of it. I think we find things like symmetry. I always feel like in period pieces, like the initial sort of like idea is like, oh, we should be symmetrical and sort of like very observational in this space. And I think we wanted to be really subjective. We wanted to be with the characters and have it be specifically about these characters. And of course, the time period affects the story, but we didn't want it to feel like, oh, this is a 50s story. And we wanted it to be like, this is a story. It's a great story that these characters are living in, and it happens to be in the 50s, but it's not what this is about from a filmmaking standpoint, I guess I'd say.
Well, and you've alluded to it a little earlier in one of the previous questions, but what would you say is the arc for the cinematography or the colors that you used?
Well, I did work with another cinematographer named Jason Oldak, a very talented guy, and I think I sort of set the ball rolling in the first 2 episodes with a ton of movement and a ton of as we're learning this character, and this part of her life is this part of her life that is sort of like, well, she doesn't realize it is this great part of her life that is going to inform the rest of the series. There's a ton of movement. There is a ton of like the actors sort of setting how the scenes are going to block, and so it feels very alive. And then after the first 2 episodes, we get into a more sort of like grief. There's a few episodes of this character dealing with a tragedy that's happened in her storyline, and the camera becomes subjective in a different way and is less about walk and talks and the energy of the space that the character's in and things like that. So I can speak to the arc basically of the first 2 episodes is just that we're telling a love story that we want the camera to the central characters. We want the camera to be sort of dancing with them all the time. And when we have interactions with other characters, there'll maybe be something that feels a little off or feels a little bit more sort of observational than subjective. And there were things like rules that we had that like we didn't, for instance, in episode 1 and 2, we didn't want to do any conventional coverage. And by conventional, I mean sort of like matching coverage. Like when you're shooting, say you're shooting 2 people talking, and you want to be on one lens on one person, then you want to be on a similar lens and distance from the other person. So when you're cutting back and forth during the conversation, the viewer is less sort of affected by the edit. And so I would call that as feeling like normal. So we were like, one of the things we tried to do is we'll only cover the main characters who are having this love story. We'll cover them. They'll be the only ones that we give like normal coverage, so that the viewer isn't bumped at all, and the viewer is just drawn in more and more just to them. But then there's something a little bit off about the other characters who are sort of coming in and trying to throw up roadblocks for our lead, Elizabeth Zott, and like just subtle things like that in the progression. We would try and just sort of little sleights of hand to make our main characters seem to keep them the focus of attention with a large cast of peripheral characters.
So when you're doing, like if I talk to a composer, they're going to talk about creating the music specific for each character and then also for the scene. But when you're creating like the look or the feel, do you get down to like, you know, these characters are going to be lit this way, or do you always keep it at like the scene looks like this and the characters are within the scene?
I think I'll usually start with the scene looks like this, but then I think especially on how much time you spend shooting on a TV show with these actors, you sort of start to learn their faces and see, and we do test also in the beginning about like, okay, well, Brie Larson really looks perfect on a 40 mil lens. Like we're always going to use that, always at the eye line. Like definitely each actor interacts with the camera differently. And I think as we learn that either through testing or while we're shooting a show, we'll always tend to try and use those things that we know. Okay, this is how this person looks the best. We should try and fit that in. We should try and use that specific lens and light combo for this person. And you know, certain actors do better with side light or front light, or and by better, I mean it's also just another tool. Someone can look more angry more easily with a side light, for instance, than they can be doing the same action in a scene, but with front light, the performance will feel completely different. So I think, yeah, the characters certainly inform how we're going to shoot each of them, I think. But back to like, at least for the first 2 episodes of the show, 1 and 2, the pilot, the emphasis was really on letting them dictate and sort of push the camera around and be moving with them. And then when we would find a close up with one of them for particularly emotive moments, that would be, each would have their specific sort of light and lens combination.
Interesting. Well, I'm wondering what some of the challenges of shooting episode 1 were.
Challenges. So I think whenever you're doing a pilot, and particularly on this pilot, it's figuring out the major challenges are the same, I think, with any sort of production, which is you're figuring out what the production can support. And so it's always the first couple of weeks of sort of figuring out how big can I dream, how much can we realistically pull off as far as the scope of how our shoot is going to go. And I think it's really important to me to think about what the budget can support, because I think when you push it too far as size, that's when you start doing crazy overtime and you start sort of like running your crew into the ground. And on a TV show, you have to take care of your crew, I think. So one of the big challenges is figuring out how do I fit in, push the edges out, but fit within the box that I'm sort of working within. What's the best thing that I can do with what Apple's going to pay for on this show, right? And but I mean, it's less a challenge and more like this is what we have to do on every project, and figure out how we can best achieve, everything that's in the script. I think it was really interesting with this script when it initially came in, and because of the book, so much was about food. So she has a cooking show, and she cooks for herself, and it's about the relationship between science and cooking. And we initially had been planning to do tons of like insane tabletop sequences, and that's something that's not my specialty. So we had engaged with some really amazing tabletop directors and directors of photography as well, and we were sort of planning on doing things like probe lens going between sheets of lasagna, and like watching the actual chemical reactions of things within while they're being cooked. So some really like macro cool food photography. And that's, of course, like one of those things that kind of always gets kicked to the end of the schedule. Like we'll do the insert unit type thing. And this was actually one time where it was great that it happened, because as we started shooting and saw the sort of like chemistry between the 2 leads, it just kind of, we were like, oh, we don't need to do that. Like they're good. So in this way, it was kind of a challenge that felt like it solved itself in a way, which was great. But there weren't any different challenges necessarily for this show than there aren't with any show.
So now one of my questions for you then, because like you said, you got that opening, you get to set everything up. So I'm wondering, like, what is that scene that you absolutely loved that you got to shoot that it's going to end up on your reel or on your website?
Mm-hmm. The scene that I think is really, there are a few scenes that I think are really special in Lessons in Chemistry, but I really loved creating the opening. The first shot of the show, we had like a 75-foot techno crane kind of swooping down out of the Burbank sky in the 50s, and it sort of tilts and pans and trucks over to this scene that's happening in a parking lot. So we have all these extras and their cool wardrobe and all these cool 50s cars and everything like that. And the camera swoops down and we see a car drive in. We don't know who it is yet. It's the opening of the show. We see a woman get out and walk towards the stage door, and we're following her, and that it turns into a oneer that goes inside into a steady cam move. It's just a really fun way to sort of get right into the intro of the show. So we did this big steady cam swoop outside that we used sort of a background extra wiping the camera to stitch together with our stage. And so that was, not in the same place. And it was, I love technical, like a technical, practical swap. Like we didn't have to do a ton of VFX. They had to VFX out some stuff for the beginning of the shot because it was in like Pasadena or something like that where we shot this, and it was very modern. But it was really cool technically to be able to stitch those things together so simply and have it just work. And it was a testament to Cat Smith production design and our excellent camera operators and dolly grips.
Well, you sort of mentioned a bit about VFX. So what was the breakdown of or the need of VFX in this show? Was it very minimal, or was it?
There were some things I love to sort of come at VFX, at least in a standard show, of like we only use VFX for things we can't do practically.
Mm-hmm.
And to try and not lean on them unless absolutely necessary. So the show was relatively minimal as far as VFX. There were some things we had to do, like a spoiler alert, the like bus hit but it was just simple kind of like blue screen layering and just a little bit of planning ahead to make sure we had cameras in similar places. And then we just pulled a stuntman out and they blended it together in the edit. But otherwise, just cleanup of modern stuff that we couldn't have locations clear or buildings that wouldn't have been there. Cat Smith was pretty militant, adamant about what was period and what was not, and she was kept us pretty true as far as that goes. I got a real education in Los Angeles streetlights of the 50s and of the 50s. It was good. It was good to learn.
So now I'm wondering, like I think about your role as a cinematographer, and one of the big challenges now, or one of the big sort of advancements in the last 20 years, is the relationship with the colorist. So I'm wondering, what was your relationship with the colorist on this project? How did you guys work together to get this look?
So the colorist on this project is a guy named Ian Vertovec, who I have worked with before. He's great. He's at Light Iron. He is super technically proficient while also having a great eye. And we have a great rapport. And like I've done a show with him before, and I think another feature. But when I met with him for this, I brought a bunch of old. There's actually like I guess it's like a Phaedon or Taschen book called A Feast for the Eyes that is old. It's old food photography, and I think there's something really interesting about those sort of old food ads that you would find in the back of a magazine, and sort of how do we get a cool relationship with color in our LUT. We built a LUT together, and we shot on the Alexa Mini LF, and so we we shot some tests with some wardrobe and some of the colors that Kat was interested in using for the walls, and some of the colors that Mirren was interested in using for some of the costuming. And so we shot a test, and then Ian and I sat and we were looking at these old pictures and looking up what some of the old sort of stills film stocks that people would have been using in the 50s. And we ended up using like this AGFA film emulation that we reduced it a little bit so it wasn't like the crazy, not all the way crazy color contrast that the emulsions used to have, but we did that, and then we moved the white point of the LUT up a couple thousand Kelvin or 1,000 Kelvin just to sort of feel like California and feel not, so that we wouldn't be tempted to go towards sepia. We did a little bit of warmth just in the sort of in the overall and the highlights. But yeah, we worked together pretty extensively, and then afterwards, after it's all done, he had actually worked with Bree on a number of projects, so kind of knew what she would like and what she wouldn't like as well, as far as how she was seen. And it was just a great collaboration. So yeah, we also had a DIT on set, Scott Resnick, this was my second time working with him. That was really helpful for just matching on the day and helping me stay honest as far as exposures and not having anything go too far in any direction.
Yeah, I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
I love the movie Constantine. I don't know how much it's a guilty pleasure, but I always watch that movie, and I feel like a lot of people are just like either haven't heard of it or think it's dumb, and I love that movie.
What is it about the movie?
Just I love any movie that creates a sort of comprehensive world with its own rules, and doesn't apologize for it. Like that's to me as a DP, that's my favorite thing, and I feel like that's a movie that sort of does that. Just doesn't it doesn't talk about the fact that the rules are different. It just the story is just there and you're figuring it out for yourself. But I love the world that they created. I hope there's another one.
Thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And that's our show for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. This video is made possible by our sponsors, AJA. We'd like to thank AJA for all their support and tell you to go to AJA.com for all your production and post-production needs.